Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
The walls close in on the defense secretary. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. As a new Inspector General report into Signalgate drops, just a day before the admiral who ordered the second strike on the alleged Venezuelan drug boat testifies on Capitol Hill. We're going to get the latest ahead from Bloomberg's national security expert, Nick Wadhams. And we'll have insights coming up from former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, former ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. Republicans pull out a win in Tennessee, but Democrats still declare a moral victory, and we'll get into that with our political panel, all after a look at Wall Street. Let's start there right now with Alexis Christoforous at World Headquarters in New York. An update so far, Alexis.
Thanks, Joe. And more proof today that the labor market is weakening. Private companies cut 32,000 workers in November, with small businesses hit the hardest. That's according to payrolls processing firm ADP. That report, of course, the last monthly jobs picture the Federal Reserve will see before its meeting next week. Now the odds of a Fed rate cut this month have surged to 98%. That is helping to fuel a rally on Wall Street. The Dow Industrial is up 355 points. The S&P 500 adding about 23, and the NASDAQ Composite up now about 50. Yields are mostly lower. We've got the 10-year yield at 4.06%, the 2-year yield at 3.49%. Taking a look at gold, up fractionally at $42,009. West Texas Intermediate up 1% now to $59.23 the barrel, and Bitcoin up about 1.5%, now above $93,000. In stock news, shares of Microsoft down more than 1% after a report that the company has lowered expectations for business customers to spend money on its cloud units marketplace for artificial intelligence models and agents. Microsoft's denying that report, stating that aggregate sales quotas for AI products have not been lowered, and that the story inaccurately combines the concepts of growth and sales quotas. And Spotify Wrapped is here, and it looks like Bad Bunny has been named its most played artist, dethroning Taylor Swift. Bad Bunny earned more than 19.8 billion streams globally this year, followed by Swift, The Weeknd, Drake, and Billie Eilish. Once again, stocks higher across the board, with the Dow now up 362 points. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Alexis, thank you so much. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Great to have you with us here on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, with breaking news from Washington. Multiple reports now about a Pentagon watchdog report into the Signalgate scandal, finding that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth violated some of the department's regulations when he shared sensitive information from his cell phone on Signal, and in fact may have endangered troops in the process. We're going to have a lot more on this when we spend some time with Nick Wadhams, and coming up as well, Jane Harman will join us in studio with our eyes on tomorrow's testimony from the admiral that ordered the second strike on the alleged drug boat coming out of Venezuela. This was, of course, a big topic of conversation as President Trump held his final cabinet meeting of the year yesterday. And sitting right next to him was the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, who made clear that he was not, in fact, the one who ordered that second strike. And while he was watching the attack live on a live video feed, he had left the room before it was clear that there were survivors in the water who were then killed by the second strike. President Trump was asked about this before Hegseth even got into details, and clearly not concerned about the way this all unfolded. Here's what the commander-in-chief had to say.
I would say this, they had a strike. I hear the gentleman that was in charge of that is extraordinary. He's an extraordinary person. I'll let Pete speak about him. But Pete was satisfied. Pete didn't know about second attack having to do with two people. And I guess Pete would have to speak to it. I can say this. I want those boats taken out. And if we have to, we'll attack on land also, just like we attack on sea.
Hegseth said we're just beginning attacks like these. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, Admiral Frank Bradley, who ordered that second strike, will testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee as members of Congress try to get answers that were not delivered yesterday in the cabinet meeting. Nick Wadhams, who runs our national security coverage here in Washington, is with us in studio with more on this. Nick, when you add everything up here, the questions about Venezuela, the testimony tomorrow, this Signalgate IG report that just dropped, This is probably not a fun day for Pete Hegseth. By the way, he's lighting the Pentagon Christmas tree a few hours from now.
Right, and we will be watching that one. I mean, listen, there are a couple of things going on here. One, it is undeniable that he has had a series of controversies and mishaps dating back to even before the administration took office. His confirmation hearing was fraught. He cleared by a single vote. There were a lot of reports about alcohol use, allegations of assault, all sorts of unsavory things in there, and that's been followed by a repeated string of things, the signal situation, and then this argument that he essentially was not there to see the second strike on this vessel that killed some survivors in what some legal experts are saying is a war crime. Yeah. At the same time, President continues, at least publicly, to say he remains satisfied with Pete Hegseth. And what you have, what the president has in his defense secretary is an official who has been unstintingly loyal, has really pushed the MAGA agenda, has gone after DEI and woke, what he sees as woke policies, has been on board with the president's push to revamp procurement, budgeting, all sorts of stuff within the Pentagon. So, so far, at least, it appears that President Trump believes that the positives outweigh the negatives when it comes to Secretary Hegseth.
Wow. Will we see a clarified policy when it comes to Venezuela following these investigations? You've got armed services committees in both chambers looking into this. Once they get the admiral's take on this, I assume there'll be some sort of report. What follows?
Well, you know, I think you actually have seen a more clear policy in the sense of what hasn't happened, because after that initial strike, that was the first strike that the U.S. did on September 2nd. And the reporting we have gleaned since then, and what officials have confirmed, is that there were at least two hits, maybe even more on that boat. One to take it out of action, and then a second to fully destroy the boat and also kill survivors. What we do know since then is that they have not done secondary or tertiary strikes to kill survivors. So you had the case some weeks ago where they actually then went in and collected people who had survived the initial strike and sent them home. So
that was based on the findings from the first strike.
We don't know what happened there exactly, but putting together those two events, the experts we have spoken to suggest that would indicate a change in policy, that there may have been a recognition that the initial version got them into very, very thorny legal trouble, moral trouble. Geneva Conventions explicitly say you cannot do this, that is a violation of international law. So just based on the actions that they have taken, we have not seen a pattern that was repeated, at least publicly, that we know of, based on what happened on that September 2nd.
Just to be clear, it's important what you just said, and everyone is a little bit too cool for school walking around Washington talking about this double tap strike. Right. You've got survivors in the water. That a double tap violates the Geneva Convention.
Yes, I mean, so what's happened is and there is an argument that any strike whatsoever on these boats is a violation of international law, because there's a real challenge of the president's argument that these pose an imminent threat to the United States. And for years, the U.S. has interdicted these boats, arrested the people on them, seized the drugs. Now the president says they pose a mortal threat to the United States, and he has the right to. He calls the people on the boats narco-terrorists. So there's the broad umbrella of the fact that there are a lot of very serious questions about whether these strikes are illegal in the first place. But there is very little doubt that if you take out the boat, it is no longer a threat, and you have survivors clinging to the boat.
Yes.
It would be the same thing as you would see in war, where the laws of war prevent you from going around and executing the people who have been wounded in your attacks. You can't do that.
Right.
So that's how we now find ourselves in this situation.
Admiral Halsey is going to have some interesting things to say as well.
He is, and it'll be really interesting to see the line he walks, because you've seen this from the president and also from Pete Hegseth in his repeated commentary, where he says, hey, I wasn't there.
Yeah,
I didn't see that happen. So sort of distancing himself, but also saying, I support the guy who made the order. He did the right thing. So he's walking a very fine line. So, Bradley, it'll be really interesting to see what he says tomorrow in terms of, hey, I was just following orders. Will he say, I believe this order may have been legally questionable? We just don't know.
Will that be made public, or we don't know that testimony?
I am not sure at this point. We don't know. I don't think there will be a public hearing.
Everything leaks out.
It may have to open up.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick.
My
Great
pleasure.
to see you, as always. Nick Wadhams got his hands full these days running our national security team here in Washington. With much more to consider here, we're going to bring Jane Harman in on this conversation coming up next. But there's an important story in the Washington Post today that I'll point you to. It might get some eye rolls from folks who support what's going on in the Caribbean right now. But the family of a Colombian man who was killed in a strike September 15th has filed a complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, alleging the U.S. committed human rights violations in an extrajudicial killing. I just mention this because it's the first time a name has been attached to any of this. Alejandro Andres Carrana Medina, 42-year-old, a fisherman, killed, as I mentioned, in the strike off the Colombian coast on September 15th. He's got a family, turns out, and they've got a lawyer. The grieving family left without their chief breadwinner, as we read here. Carranza's family seeking compensation. I guess he had kids. Very unclear to see if they have the power to enforce any recommendations that are made. I told you Jane Harman was coming, and she's with us in studio today. Former Democratic Congresswoman from California, importantly, former ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, and it's great to see you in the flesh.
You too, Joe.
So if you were running the Intel Committee right now, either as chair or ranking member, what questions would you be asking about what is happening in the waters off Venezuela? And would you even get a briefing? Because as the Democrat on that panel, from what I understand now, you still would not have heard from the administration.
Well, I think Mark Warner has said they got very unsatisfying briefings.
Yeah.
He was the chair. He's now the ranking member on the Senate side. I'm not sure what's happened on the House side. But what would I be doing? I would be raising hell. I think Congress not only has a right to be briefed, but I think Congress is abdicating its role. That I would give good marks to 3 Republicans, at least that I can think of. Rand Paul, I guess he's a libertarian. Yeah. Roger Wicker, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Mike Rogers, who chairs the House Armed Services Committee. And they have been pushing back. But where's the rest of Congress? Congress is on trial here, and Congress is really on trial with respect to Ukraine. That's why I wore my scarf carried back from Kyiv.
Yeah, well, I'd like to get into that in a moment because these are both evolving, both of these stories before our eyes here.
The IG report, I was just...
Well, there's another one for you. But in terms of the admiral who ordered this second strike, based on what you understand, what's he going to tell these committees when he goes to testify tomorrow? How damaging could that be for the administration?
I think he should have followed the advice of the 6 Democrats who said never follow an illegal order.
You believe that was an illegal order?
I believe it was, and I believe he should have known that. I'm not sure what he did. Let's be sure we know what the timeline is. It's a little bit, to me, eye-scratching to believe that Hegseth didn't give the order and was too busy to see it executed in a case like this.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
What did you make of that yesterday?
Well,
Pentagon's a busy place. I had to get to a meeting, he said.
Yeah, it is a busy place. And maybe he needs to get a little busier about being on top of the workload there. Wow. Just saying that rumors are rampant. That doesn't mean they're true, that his days are numbered. Yeah. And that Trump maybe doesn't want to do the deal personally and wants it somehow to evolve. But I think he's not well liked in the building. He's not well respected. And I think former military, and I talked to lots of them, are really pretty worried about the civilian leadership at the Pentagon.
A lot of folks pointed out the fact that he was not sent to Kyiv or Russia, for that matter. The Army Secretary was in Kyiv, Dan Driscoll, talking with Ukrainians. But we're still waiting, Jane, for a readout on this meeting with Vladimir Putin. And I want everyone to hear first what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, had to say about this negotiation in the president's cabinet meeting yesterday. Let's listen.
Every day is a challenge, but it's been driven personally by the president. It's the reason why we're involved in this whole Ukraine-Russia conflict. That's not our war. It's not the president's war. This war started. It never would have happened if you'd been president. Even as we speak to you now, Steve Witkoff is in Moscow. trying to find a way to end this war, to save lives of 9,000 people, Mr. President, as you know, are dying every week. More people are dying a week in that war than have died in the entirety of the U.S.'s involvement in Afghanistan or Iraq. Just think about that, how bloody and destructive it is.
But here's what we've not heard from the White House. Anything about the meeting. The Russians have said a lot, but there's no readout from the administration, which is extremely unusual. How do you read into it?
Well, a couple of comments. First about Rubio. I was in Halifax at the Halifax Security Forum a couple of weekends ago when the CODEL, led by Jeanne Shaheen, but also having Republican members, got a call that evening, the evening that the 28-point plan surfaced, from Rubio saying, well, it's just a draft. It's not cooked yet. Yep. He wasn't in the room. He had nothing to do with it, or probably had nothing to do with it. And I think it's dead on arrival. I mean, I brought some props. I don't want to surprise you. But this was from Senator Mitch McConnell when that plan was released. Quote, Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool.
This is a tweet, right? This
is a tweet from Mitch McConnell on X. And this one was from Roger Wicker, whom I just mentioned as chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Quote, any suggestion that we can pursue arms control with a serial liar and killer like Putin should be treated with great skepticism, unquote. So I think that Rubio's trying to make his best case. He is the Secretary of State. He is the one who should be leading the negotiations. This other team, I'm not saying they're terrible people. I'm sure they're trying to make a deal, and wouldn't it be nice for the war to end? But let's remind everybody that Russia was the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim.
Yes.
And rewarding Russia and punishing Ukraine is the wrong outcome.
Well, everything in that plan looks like it would be a reward, right?
Well,
so do you trust Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner running this conversation?
Well, I don't want to talk about trust, but the plan as explained to me looked like there was some oops in there. There was some bad translation from the Russian. Looks like exactly what Mitch McConnell said, that Putin is playing Trump. And if we're not talking about it, then I'm betting nothing very much good came today, except for Russia blasting Europe and threatening, some action against Europe. The sadness is NATO's meeting today. Rubio has for the first time in this century or something.
What do you make of this?
Blown off.
He sent a deputy.
I think it's a message to NATO. And
that means Russia or Europe will have no input on how this ends with Russia.
It's a very bad. Well, let's see. It's a very bad message to NATO. We are a member of NATO. We're not a bystander here. We're a leader of NATO. And I think that's a terrible message. And one more point. I said Congress is on trial. Congress is on trial. There is a Graham-Blumenthal bill to impose secondary sanctions on all countries, all.
Isn't Lindsey Graham talking to Trump about this on the golf course?
That deal with Russia. It has 85-plus co-sponsors in the Senate. That is a veto-proof majority, which means if Lindsey Graham, I'm sure Blumenthal would like to do this, calls up that bill, that bill passes. And it will, I'm guessing, pass the House too. And then that is real pressure on Putin. Is Congress for Ukraine, or is Congress just, again, hiding and out of the game, the Republicans in Congress?
Well, let's see if the president feels like he's being strung along by Putin enough to greenlight that sanctions bill. Jane Harman, I love that you printed out the X posts. I'm picturing you back in Congress with the easels set up in the hearing.
You got to read this one.
I wish we had time to do that. Oh, no, I saw that column this morning. A moral slum. That's conservative George Will. She's made for television and radio. There's only one Jane Harman, former Democratic Congresswoman from California. Thank you, Jane, for the insights. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Bloomberg. And make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Hear our full conversation with Jane Harman by going to Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Watch us live on YouTube and listen always at Bloomberg.com.
It is 1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Alexis Christoforous. A new report showing continued weakness in the job market is boosting hopes for a Fed rate cut next week. According to the payroll company ADP, U.S. companies cut 32,000 jobs in November. That was more than expected. Wall Street now putting the odds of a rate cut next week at 98%. It would be the third cut of the year. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 363 points, led higher by shares of United Healthcare, American Express, and Goldman Sachs. The S&P 500 up about 21, and the NASDAQ Composite gaining 40 points. We've got robotics companies in the spotlight today on a report that the Trump administration is considering issuing an executive order on the technology next year. According to Politico, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has been meeting with CEOs in the industry, and that the Department of Transportation is preparing to announce a robotics working group. Among the movers today, shares of iRobot up 64%. We've got shares of Rich Tech up about 10%, and Teradyne gaining more than 1%. Again, stocks higher, with the Dow up 365 points. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Alexis Christoforous will have more on the markets in just about 20 minutes' time here on Balance of Power. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Unless you're dialed up on YouTube, either way, your satellite radio, we're always glad to spend time here. This is the Wednesday edition with much to talk about. We're going to get into the Tennessee election results here, the special last evening with our political panel, but want to just give you a heads up on a special conversation coming up later this hour as we consider the looming renegotiation of the USMCA. You haven't heard me use those letters together in a while here. With trade in mind, we're going to be joined here at the table in studio for a rare conversation with the two former negotiators of the USMCA. From Mexico, from Canada. They're going to be with us here at the table about their view here moving forward and what a renegotiated agreement might look like. With them today, Kevin Brady, the former Republican Congressman, former chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, who's been working overtime trying to push this renegotiation effort. That's all coming up after the bottom of the hour here. With our eyes on Tennessee and Republican Matt Van Epps, he had the endorsement of Donald Trump and had the full weight and thrust of the Republican Party behind him. The Speaker of the House was there stumping, and the Republican Party put a lot of money into this race. Congratulations on Truth Social to Matt Van Epps in his big congressional win in the great state of Tennessee, President Trump last evening. But if you talk to a Democrat, they see this a lot differently because he won by single digits, and this was a district that Donald Trump won by 22 points. You wouldn't know it by listening to Mr. Van Epps, who addressed supporters after the race was called last night. Listen.
Tonight, you've sent a message loud and clear. The people of Middle Tennessee stand with President Donald J. Trump. To President Donald J. Trump, thank you, sir. Tonight we showed running from Trump is how you lose. Running with Trump is how you win. President Trump was all in with us, and it made the difference. In Congress, I'll be all in with him.
All right, so there you go. +1 for Mike Johnson. But if you're a Democrat looking at the road to the midterms here, you're looking at this very differently because the fact of the matter is Democrats cut the margin here. I already told you, do the math. Cut the margin by 15 percentage points, right? Trump won by 22, Van Epps won by 9. Is this a problem? Is it even a bellwether? Because you're going to hear a lot of national Democrats and Republicans talk about this today. How about our panel right now? Rick and Caitlin are back with us. Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis, Republican strategist, partner at Stonecourt Capital, alongside Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki, senior fellow at Third Way. How you looking at this, Caitlin? Is it a moral victory for Democrats?
I don't believe in moral victories. I do think that it's a very positive sign for the party that the district swung as much as it did. There are currently about 40 other Republicans that are sitting in House seats that they won by less than the 8-point margin that we saw last night. So all of those seats should now be considered gettable. But I do think as well that, you know, the candidate in this race on the Democratic side did not benefit from nationalizing this race. And it really underscored the importance of Democrats nominating candidates who are aligned with the views and the beliefs of the districts they're running in, and to really focusing on the local issues that matter rather than trying to turn everything into, you know, cable TV fodder or what's going to play best with the Twitter audience.
Interesting. Rick, I'm curious if you're going as far down the road as some political strategists are after last evening. I was struck by the quote from Matt Whitlock, Republican in Politico this morning. Quote, if every House district in the country shifted left by this same amount, we would be looking at a blue wave far worse than 2018. Is he right?
I think he's close to being right. I think Caitlin nailed it. You'd rather win than anything. So kudos to the Republicans for pulling out a victory here. With the margins they have in the House, it's really important. Two, the only way to calculate this midterm is looking at what Trump vote doesn't show up consistently, both in the elections, this last November, and then in this election. I mean, solidly a minimum of 10% of the Republican Party doesn't show up unless Donald Trump's on the ballot. And Donald Trump won't be on the ballot in 26. So I would actually even expand the margin. It's not just 8%, where if the district was plus Republican 8, you got a horse race. I'd say it's 10 to 15, because there are now plenty of precedents to show that there is half the Republicans in these districts will only show up when Donald Trump's on the ballot. So, buddy, in the House, you're on your own. And I would say that her advice, Caitlin's advice to the Democrats, is exactly right. Don't get candidates who are just going to run against Donald Trump. His vote's not showing up anyway. Get candidates who can actually make a case in their district, and then you got something to work with.
President Trump said she despises country music. Caitlin, it could have been as simple as that. But enter political strategist Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, on X. Producer James just put this in front of me. This is remarkable. Ron DeSantis writes, special off-year and midterm elections historically benefit the party out of power because its voters are motivated to vote, while voters of the incumbent party become more complacent. He goes on to write, this is more glaring for today's GOP because a chunk of voters who put them in power in 2024 are Trump-specific voters. They will vote GOP down ballot when Trump is running, but won't turn out to vote for a typical congressman in a midterm when Trump isn't running. Caitlin, it's like Ron DeSantis was channeling Rick Davis. What do Republicans then do in the midterms?
I mean, their goal is, if they're in a state or a district that favors Trump, is to bear hug him and do everything they can to nationalize this race, to make it about Donald Trump, to turn out his voters. But I think the reality of the situation is that Trump's approval ratings keep going down. That's becoming an even riskier proposition. And it's going to just be harder for a lot of members to fight those waves. And so the question for Democrats then becomes, how do you actually leverage that and put forward candidates who are in a position to win and represent these districts?
Well, I'll tell you what, Rick, when it comes to strategy, if you were launching a campaign, and granted, a lot of them are waiting to find out what the maps are going to be for the midterms, how would you take last night's lessons in Tennessee and try to exploit them next November?
Yeah, so I think, Republicans need to take the same advice Caitlin was giving to Democrats. You can't rely on the Donald Trump vote to turn out. You've got to be very granular on the issues. You really, in this case, want to localize the election as much as possible. You don't have much to run on. The big, beautiful bill, which is your signature legislative accomplishment, is not popular. And as Caitlin said, Trump's approval rating isn't going to get better between now and next November. There's just nothing on the horizon that shows that he's going to have a big win somewhere. So the reality of it is you're on your own, buddy, and you better find votes the old-fashioned way. I'd go to the ground, knock on doors. I would find issues locally, education, health, things that are not typical Trump-related issues that you can find common cause with, especially suburban voters. The rural voters will likely be there for you, just not in the same margins as a presidential election year.
Interesting. This really does make me look forward to campaign season. Talking this out with you guys is always fascinating to me. But let's talk about the immediate impact, Caitlin. Mike Johnson now has 220 House Republicans again, so it's like we're starting the year all over. And obviously, we've got a long time before we're talking about actual midterm races. So this brings us immediately to the congressional agenda. And it might have just gotten a little more difficult for Democrats in the House to pass any extension of Obamacare subsidies. What do you think?
I think that you're increasingly going to see a number of Republicans who are looking for ways to show their independence from both House leadership and Donald Trump as part of an effort to kind of stanch the bleeding in the midterms. So I actually think that last night's results actually may give Democrats a couple of spots to work with Republicans who are in these suburban districts where ACA is very popular to get some of these key provisions across the finish line, simply because I think a lot of members in these frontline districts, they're either going to retire or they're going to look for ways to separate themselves from the national party. And this is a really easy way to do it.
Interesting. What do you think about that, Rick? Does this additional seat matter for Mike Johnson?
Look, everything matters with these slim margins, and it's just more leverage that he gets. It's incremental, but it's a good thing, right? I think Republicans really have to figure out how to get out of this trap, because the trap is they look like they are stopping healthcare from reaching Americans without a plan to replace it with anything. And as much as I like Senator Cassidy, the idea that we're going to just, give people another health account is not going to cover it with the voters. So if I were Republican strategist, I'd be finding an exit door fast to get this done before the end of the year, so that you can look at next year without having to talk about this all day long.
Well, that sounds like an opportunity for Democrats, Caitlin. What do you think?
I agree. I think Rick should take over all strategy for the Republican Party these days.
It didn't work out.
I don't
so
think
well
that's an endorsement, Rick. Yeah, he had that job.
I agree
before.
with everything.
Let's not go too far. In our remaining moment, Caitlin, the point that you made with regard to Tennessee about nationalizing the race, the fact is the Democrat in this case, Afton Bain, was called the AOC of Tennessee. President Trump said she hated country music and she despised Christians. Isn't that national politics?
Yeah. And I think, part of what's challenging is that when you look at the Senate map and you look at some of these frontline districts, you have, either primaries or candidates where you're choosing between somebody with local roots and local experience where the people know them, they know what they stand for, and candidates that are more popular online. And we should be opting for the former.
Well, this is a great conversation, and I appreciate both of your insights. Caitlin Legacki and Rick Davis together as our great panel today for the Wednesday edition. Thank you. Coming up, we're going to talk to former Republican Congressman Kevin Brady and the two gentlemen who helped to negotiate the USMCA. It's time to renegotiate. We'll get into it next right here on Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Alexis Christoforous. U.S. companies shed payrolls in November by the most since early 2023. Private sector payrolls decreased by 32,000, according to ADP research data. And while that report may be discouraging for people looking for work, it also keeps alive hopes for the Federal Reserve handing us the third interest rate cut of the year next week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up now nearly 400 points at 47,872. The S&P 500 now up about 26. We've got the NASDAQ Composite gaining 55 points. And Bitcoin continuing to bounce back, up 1.6% above $93,000. More than 202 million Americans shopped from Thanksgiving through Cyber Monday. That is the highest number on record since the National Retail Federation began tracking in 2017. As for some retailers, Macy's posting its strongest growth in more than 3 years last quarter. Shares of Macy's up 1.5%. And Dollar Tree stock also climbing after delivering stronger than expected quarterly results and healthy sales growth Dollar Tree saw record sales for Halloween while tightening its outlook and lifting profit guidance. We've got shares of Dollar Tree up nearly 3.5%, and shares of American Eagle Outfitters surging 15% after the apparel company posted better than expected earnings and provided upbeat guidance for fourth quarter. American Eagle said its ad campaigns with actress Sydney Sweeney and NFL star Travis Kelce are attracting more customers. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Alexis, thank you so much. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thank you for being with us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power, a program where we are allowed to do things you just can't do anywhere else. And we're going to try something right now on what is a very important day for trade here in Washington and throughout the hemisphere, if you actually look at this closely. 3 days of hearings kicking off today by the U.S. Trade Representative to examine the future of the USMCA, right? The U.S.-Mexico Trade Agreement. And the agenda is pretty ambitious. I've been looking at this. More than 100 witnesses testifying to their vision for the future of the USMCA, which will be under review in the months ahead. Coming up, we're going to be joined by the two men who negotiated the original agreement. They're with us in studio here, alongside former Republican Congressman Kevin Brady, who, of course, chaired the House Ways and Means Committee, who's been helping to push this effort here in Washington, where there are so many plates spinning in the air. You need someone like Kevin Brady to keep your focus on things. And we're going to start with the chairman right now. Kevin Brady, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to see you as well. Before we get into the trade matter, I have to tap you as a congressional expert and a man who was known as a negotiator, because we're coming up on a difficult deadline here when it comes to healthcare subsidies. And the argument over those subsidies led to the longest shutdown in American history, of course. What would be your advice for the Republican leadership, knowing that John Thune promised Democrats a floor vote? The House is in question.
Yeah. So I think Senator Thune, Leader Thune, is certainly going to fulfill that commitment. I think we know that agreement, which is just a major extension of it, won't go forward. In the House, I think they're frustrated because those 8 weeks of the shutdown wasted the time to be able to do the negotiations. So the clock's ticking, it's moving very quickly. I'm not so sure they're going to hit that number. There's a lot of work being done about how do we address this. Clearly, the COVID pandemic is over. It's time to really go back to some normalcy here. That health care within the Affordable Care Act is just broken. It is expensive. It's not necessarily good health care. It is going up to people making $500,000 a year. There's a lot of imaginary accounts. 40% have never filed a claim. There's a lot of problems. So they're trying to figure out. So what are the key asks? In trying to reform this in a better way. And try to do it in that timetable, Joe. I think it's going to be hard.
It's going to be tough. We've got funding running out potentially January 30. Do you worry that this leads to another shutdown?
That one I don't. I think they can get it done by the 30th. But there's similar dynamics to what we just went through will be occurring at the end of January.
Yeah, nothing's really changed actually. Right?
Yeah, really. It is Groundhog Day, just 2 months later. But I don't know anyone. Certainly on the Republican side, who thinks it's smart to shut down the government. They're working hard.
Well, in your view, just lastly on this, before we open our conversation to trade, should this be a reform of Obamacare or a replace of Obamacare?
No, it's going to be a reform.
Yeah.
But this is a program that's really ingratiated itself.
The roots run deep.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a huge prospecting for making it dramatically better, and certainly for taxpayers and the people getting the health care.
Well, we're going to talk about the USMCA here. Your involvement has been deliberate as you're actually working to promote the renegotiation of this deal here. It's a mandatory review. How much of this needs to, in fact, be renegotiated versus renewed?
I think the original premise, having worked with President Trump and negotiators, I led the House effort to secure passage. It really was sort of a check-in. How we doing? Is it being implemented? Is it being enforced? Where do we strengthen? To where the president, as likes to bring other projects and other ideas into these conversations. But at the end of the day, for the president, this is the gold standard of trade agreements for America. Certainly the most consequential we have. It's already proven to make America, because of the relationship with Canada and Mexico, in a really smart design. Zero tariffs, near zero barriers, all integrated. That has made the U.S. more secure, economically much more stronger. And as we look to China, allows us to be far more competitive in the future against that threat. So, yeah, this is an important, the review in the beginning of it, very important step to preserving this agreement.
All right, so you set the stage. Now let's do something no one else would do. We bring in the two gentlemen, as we mentioned, who negotiated the original USMCA. They're with us in studio right now. Ken Smith Ramos, Office of the Secretariat of the Economy Partner at Aegon, former Mexican Chief Negotiator. It's great to have you with us. And Steve Verheul, Special Advisor for Trade Policy to Canada's Deputy Minister of Finance. When you negotiated this originally, it's great to meet both of you, and thank you for being part of our conversation. Steve, I'm going to start with you here. When will we have a pathway, a timeline for negotiations?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that we necessarily will.
Yeah.
I think that there's certainly a timeline in the agreement about how the review should conclude by July 1st. All three countries have to commit in writing that they want the agreement to continue. But the process before that is not spelled out. And I think we'll be waiting to see how the U.S. wants to move and how quickly, because I think it'll be in their corner just to get the ball rolling.
Interesting. With that said, do you worry that the administration is not focused on this?
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for the invitation. Well, we know that for Mexico, for Canada, hopefully for the United States, there's a realization of the value that USMCA brings to the economies of all three countries. This is an agreement that is worth $2 trillion for the three North American countries. Just between Mexico and the U.S., we're talking about $900 billion in trade. Wow. And the U.S. is the #1 investor in Mexico. Canada's #3. And so this is a priority, a very strong priority for President Sheinbaum to preserve the trade agreement. So part of the objective in this context that we're living through right now with the tariffs that Mexico and Canada are also facing, the Mexican government has been trying to negotiate its way out of these tariffs that we're facing, clearing the deck and making sure that we can have a constructive review of the agreement so that it gets extended for another 16 years as is established in the USMCA. Hopefully that, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada will come together to maintain a trilateral agreement. That is certainly the hope of the Mexican government and certainly the Mexican private sector as well.
You use the word preserve, which I'm going to believe is intentional. Do we worry that there will be no renewal or no renegotiation? Is there a possibility that the USMCA goes away?
It's possible. The U.S. could withdraw from the agreement. There is a provision for that, as there is in most trade agreements. I think it'll be more likely that we'll do something with the review, but if the U.S. does not sign on for an extension on July 1st, then we're into annual reviews, but the agreement itself continues for another 10 years. So we may be in a continuing uncertain environment.
Is that a strategy for this administration? You guys have been through this before. You withdraw only to gain leverage by coming back in. How do you frame the administration's ambitions here?
Well, in the original negotiation, we had several instances when President Trump threatened to pull out of the NAFTA. However, this time around, what we see is a situation where perhaps the U.S. will use the leverage of the tariffs that are being imposed on Mexico and Canada during the USMCA discussions. As was mentioned, this is not an automatic renegotiation. Right. It can be at the level of an administrative review where the three countries analyze how to improve the implementation of an agreement which is clearly successful. It's promoting investment and trade in North America. And at the end of the day, the best way for North America to compete successfully with the rest of the world, especially with China, is to eliminate as much as we can any of the trade barriers between the three countries. So yes, there will be tough moments during the review. I'm sure strategies that are used to generate pressure on Mexico and Canada. But at the end of the day, I think that cooler heads will prevail and that we'll have not only the preservation of the agreement, but the opportunity to lay the groundwork to continue strengthening North American economic integration. That should be the goal of the three countries.
A lot has evolved since the original agreement was made. When you think about digital technologies, artificial intelligence, even more specifically, and some of these have come into play with talks between the administration and Canada directly. How much will that be something to figure out in these negotiations that might not have been addressed in the first version?
Yes, I think that's certainly an area where we could spend a fair amount of time on. And I think that puts us in the right kind of orientation. Where can we improve the agreement and modernize it to some degree? And I think there are other areas we could do that with as well, particularly the economic security questions, relations with China, all of that. And I think that puts us on a much better path than trying to have differences between us. We should be looking at the outside pressures we face.
Let's bring Kevin Brady back into the conversation here. Congressman, there's been a lot of noise around trade with this administration, and I think we could agree that there's been some bad blood created, maybe more when it comes to Canada than Mexico. I just wonder, do these two nations have similar or different approaches to dealing with this based on what we've learned in the last year?
I'd say a little different. Mainly because President Trump tends to have relationships based on personal relationships with other world leaders, and that tends to be different from country to country. But I'll tell you that the most fascinating fact about this agreement that most Americans don't think about is because of this agreement, Mexico and Canada are now Americas together. They are our largest investor, our largest customer, and our most important supplier. And they have made a commitment to the U.S. and frankly, President Trump's goals that no other nation, no other region can hope to approach. So it's going to be critical, I think, to preserve the agreement, to strengthen it. And we want that long-term certainty because we've got those outside risks from China, other foreign competitors. Mexico and Canada can help us meet and win, those economic challenges.
Common ground here. Let's talk about this with each of you specifically. Ken, Claudia Sheinbaum is coming to Washington. It's been noted that she has been a bit of a Trump whisperer, if you will, has managed to figure out how to use this relationship to the benefit of Mexico and maybe head off some issues. Is she coming here specifically for USMCA?
Well, the reason specifically has to do with the World Cup draw that's coming up. It's a wonderful opportunity next year to bring the three countries together and the world together.
So she'll be at the FIFA draw on Friday.
So hopefully, we haven't heard the confirmation as of yet, but we believe that's what will happen. But it's also a great opportunity, if possible, perhaps to meet with President Trump. I think that the Mexican government's approach to finding spaces for dialogue and negotiation with President Trump have worked well so far. The efforts to try to eliminate the tariffs that we have against Mexico have not been successful so far, but I think that it has laid the groundwork for possible agreements on that end. To the degree that we're able to get rid of these tariffs that we have in front of us and to set up a conversation around the USMCA based on future free trade without managed trade, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, etc., the region will be better served. So I think that's part of the objective. I think there is a good relationship between both heads of state, and hopefully that can lead to actual concrete results of getting rid of the tariffs and strengthening our agreement as we go forward.
Steve, we only have about a minute left, and I don't want to cut you off, but I'd love to hear from you more on how this negotiation might solve the tension between our two countries.
Well, I think the tension comes and goes. I think actually Prime Minister Carney seems to get along quite well with President Trump, but that hasn't translated into anything more concrete beyond good conversations. So we're hoping that we'll find a way to get on a better track and make some progress from here.
Well, we'd love to stay in touch with both of you with the help of Kevin Brady. Thank you so much for a unique conversation. Ken Smith Ramos, Steve Verheul, and of course, former Congressman and former Chairman Kevin Brady with us here in a special conversation on Balance of Power. I'll meet you back here on the late edition, 5 p.m. Eastern, only on Bloomberg TV and radio. And make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcast to hear our full dive on renegotiating the USMCA. And listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.